Welcome to the RevRoom. I'm your host, Rachel Bryant. Join me each episode as we discuss the strategies of top marketing practitioners, uncovering the tactics that transform ideas into revenue. Whether you're a seasoned marketer or an aspiring leader, the RevRoom is your go-to source for actionable advice and industry trends. So grab a coffee, get comfy, and enjoy this episode. Hey there, RevRoom listeners. Today we're tackling something that's probably keeping you up at night. You know, that nagging feeling that your lead gen strategy isn't quite cutting it anymore. Look, let's be real. We've all been there, obsessing over MQL targets while our buyers are out there doing their own thing, researching us anonymously like they're planning some surprise party we're not invited to. Please invite us. And here's the thing, and I'm saying this with love as your revenue obsessed friend who's been in the trenches. It's time to stop forcing that traditional lead gen playbook. Our guest today, Kerry Cunningham from Sixth Sense, brings fresh research that confirms what many of us have really been suspecting. The B2B buying process has fundamentally changed. And spoiler alert, it's not about form fills anymore, but you knew that. As someone who's helped countless marketing teams transform their go-to-market strategies, I'm thrilled to spend time talking about what's actually working in B2B today and how you can change your go-to-market strategies. We'll cut through the noise, we'll skip the theoretical stuff, and get straight to the practical stuff you can actually use. So grab your coffee and let's talk about how we can stop chasing leads and really start enabling real buying behavior for today's B2B buyer. Hey guys, we've broken up this recording into 2 episodes. So this is part 1 of our episode with Kerry, and we're going to talk a little bit about all of the research that he's seen, all the data that he's seen. In part 2, which you can also find, please make sure you go and listen. We're going to talk more about the practical applications of what you can do with this research. How do we change what we're doing, and how does it change the way our organization thinks and is organized? So thanks for listening, and make sure you listen to episode number 2. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RevRoom podcast. Glad you're with us again. I'm really excited about our guest today. We have Kerry Cunningham on today from Sixth Sense. I'll let him introduce himself here in a minute, but he's going to really talk to us about the new B2B buyer's journey and all the research that he's done and tell us a little bit more about that. And we'll dig into okay, what does that mean for us as marketers and sales leaders and whatnot? So, Kerry, welcome to the podcast. We're so excited to have you here.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and
Yeah,
just to let the audience get to know you a little bit more.
yeah, sure. I'm working for a company called Sixth Sense. Software company will probably come up a little bit as we talk, not as a pitch, just as a concept. Prior to coming to Sixth Sense about 3 years ago, I spent 8 years at Serious Decisions and Forrester. And while I was there, was one of the co-authors of the Demand Unit Waterfall, which I think a lot of people know about, and then its successor after that as well. A bunch of stuff around buying signals. So buying signals are something a lot of people talk about today. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, in the course of our conversation. We started thinking about that, quite a long time ago for reasons that I think will become pretty obvious. And so anyway, that's kind of by way of, what I've been up to lately. That's it. I've been in B2B marketing for most of my adult life, but I took about almost 5 years sabbatical out of B2B and spent virtually all of that time working in research labs and social sciences and mostly social psychology research labs. Excuse me. That really has informed how I look at B2B. And when I came back to B2B, I looked around and a lot of what I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. And now I know how to get at why it doesn't, or maybe find out that it does. Other than that, I've lived in California most of my adult life. I live in Palm Springs now, but I grew up in New England and still obsessed with Boston sports, but happy I don't have winter.
Yes. I'm jealous of that because we definitely have winter, but no, that's great. Thank you so much, Kerry. Well, one of the things we love to do here on the podcast before our guests, when we dive into the content we talk about and have our guests bring their favorite mug. So mine
Yeah.
today is this really pretty mug here. It's really not my favorite, but it's one I have, and I'm starting to work through all my mugs here on the podcast, so I might have to stop showing mine. Today, it has tea in it, because it's a little later in the afternoon on Friday
True.
afternoon, and I don't really wanna be
Yeah.
up too late, so, how about you, Carrie? How about tell us about your favorite mug?
I had a hard time. So I mentioned, so I'm gonna show too. I mentioned I'm from New England, and so this is one I use a lot. My beloved Red Sox mug, but they ruined my summer again. So the hell with them. Um, so here's one that's favorite, and it's chipped from use, but I don't know if you can see these are cave drawings. I got this at a
Yes.
place called Altamira in northern Spain, and in a cave where they found some of the original, sort of oldest of cave paintings. In this case, by very ancient human beings, but there are some nearby that they think are Neanderthal
Wow.
paintings as well. But it was an amazing experience. I spent a week driving around central Spain, visiting all these sites, and my mug is. Maybe I gotta go find another one that's not as cracked, but my
I say
favorite.
a
One of my
cracked
favorite. I'm
mug is
fascinated by it.
yeah, cracked mug shows it's been loved and worn very well, so that's great.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the research and talk
Yeah.
about what you found. And I think first of all, you started talking about it a little bit as you came back to B2B from your other experience in the research field
Yeah.
and said something doesn't make sense here. So tell me a little bit about what
Yeah.
prompted this and the history behind your study.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we go back to 2013, I think is when I got a job at Serious Decisions, and that was like it was like getting into Harvard. I think in B2B at the time, it really felt like
Yeah.
this is very cool. But I had been out of B2B for quite a while, and I missed the period in B2B where marketing automation took over and inbound marketing took over everything. And so when I came back in marketing automation and inbound marketing seemed to be everything in B2B marketing, like the first thing I saw was lead scoring. And we had a lot of heated discussions about lead scoring for a long time. But when you look at that from the outside, you think, I don't think it makes very much sense that somebody looking at a white paper gets 10 points and somebody looking at some other thing gets 5 points. Like, where did that come from?
Mhm.
And where people can't answer the question, where did that come from, or why logically is that way? Yeah, I get very antsy. And so that coupled, so there was that just didn't make sense to me. And then, our job for a few of us was to help marketers try to improve their lead management processes and lead conversion processes. And that was really my primary job. And the truth is, we couldn't do it. You could help organizations improve from like 1% lead to revenue conversion rate to 2 or something. If they were terrible, you could get some improvements through process and, uh, agreements and things like that. But there was a very hard limit to how good it could be. And the limit was terrible. It
Yeah.
was at this part where you're like, "Jeez,
I remember
why are
those
we having?"
conversations by the way, Carrie, and it was like, the more the better, because if we could just increase our conversions by 1 or 2%, right, then you're having an
Right.
impact, and it was like, "It doesn't feel right either,"
Are
right?
you, yeah, are you really having an impact?
Yeah.
If you, and when you, so when you think about logically, um, that the I'm glad we're getting into this because when you think about logically the whole enterprise of inbound marketing, like if you look at the beginnings of it and how it started, um, you have back in the early, so what we tend to think of these things have been as having been around forever, but like literally, I was out of B2B mostly from 2008 to 2013. It really was, inbound marketing was nothing in 2008. It was everything in 2013. Right. So, and that's 11 years ago now. Right. Um, so it isn't that long ago. And prior to, so if you were 2005 to 2010 ish, probably there wasn't much stuff on your website. And if anybody, and people really weren't good at Googling and finding things until probably 2007, 8, 9, around there. And so if people were finding your stuff on your website, they really wanted it. And they were there because they really, really wanted to find out about your solutions.
Yeah.
Um, we have this relatively new discipline, content marketing, and great idea. Let's actually put something there that buyers might be interested in. But I think if we're all honest with ourselves, content marketing was an elaborate trick to get people to give us their email so that we could send them stuff afterwards and call them, right? That's really what it was. Now it's done some things that we'll talk about that are really great. But yeah, that's what it was, right? But when you think about the logic of that, you go from buyers are, it's hard to find you. You don't have much there. If somebody's on your website looking at your stuff, they're serious. And then we look at those things and those turn into really good leads, right? So we say, well, how do we get more of those? Well, we get more people to come to our website. But what you do when you get people to come to your website more is you bring a different kind of person at a different stage in their journey or lack thereof to your website. Now you're not bringing, you might be bringing all of the same people who would have come anyway, but now you're bringing lots and lots and lots of other people um, who are not part of active buying processes, who are not dying to find out about your solutions, but you produced a great piece of content relative to their job and they're interested, right? So the whole premise of just doing more content and getting more in market buyers was largely a fallacy in the first place. And, one of the things that we do know now from mostly from other people's research, but we did some of our own at Sixth Sense is that, a really small percentage of your addressable market in market at any point in time. So there's the now famous 95-5 rule, 95 not in market, 5 in market. That's not true of most companies. For most companies, it's probably somewhere between 5 and 10, something like that. But, it's a small fragment. You're not going, marketer. We call this thing demand gen, which again didn't exist prior to 2005, 6, 7, something like that. It wasn't a function. And we call it demand gen. But if you're sending emails and you're building web pages and you're doing things to bring people to them, are you actually going to create demand for the thing that you sell, or are you just going to capture it? If what your company sells is an ERP system or a map or some other piece of software that costs $50, $70, $100,000 or more, are you going to create demand for that thing by putting noise out into the marketplace? I mean, you're going to cause a company to need that category of solution that they don't have today?
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think so, right? I mean, that's kind of far-fetched. Now, if you make a brand new kind of thing that nobody has yet, yes, you're going to have to do that, but that takes a long time.
Sure.
And so we'll talk about the parameters of the buying journey a little bit, but I think there were just some initial fallacies about even how and what inbound marketing could be doing that when I came back to marketing from the outside were kind of obvious. Now, if I'd been sitting there inside the machine the whole time, I don't think I would have been any different from anybody else. I wouldn't have looked at things anyway. But because I went away, I was outside and I came back and I'm looking around and I'm going, some of this stuff makes sense, but a lot of it doesn't. And aren't you just creating a bunch of people, interest in your content, but not necessarily more people who are actually going to be able to buy that thing that you sell that's $100,000, in value. That doesn't materialize like that.
Yeah.
You don't run an email campaign in January and have buyers of that thing in March, right?
Yeah. But
Everybody
that's how we
knows.
set up our campaigns, right? I mean, that's
Yeah,
how we
yeah.
think about it, in this
And
linear.
it's like fundamentally, obviously not true. And everybody knows it's not true the minute you sit and think about it for just a second.
Yep.
But I think it's like human nature to want that to be true for one thing. And for us to do, and for marketing to operate on the same kinds of timescales and using the same kind of thinking that sales does, right? So sales has to be working on things that they're going to close this quarter. Most of those things they closed this quarter, even they've been working on for longer than the quarter.
Yep.
But marketing is expected to contribute in the same way and really in the same time frames. So we're getting kind of far afield here, but this just isn't how it works. And that's why it was so important to for me to do this buyer journey research, because there have been, other people have done research on the buyer journey back at Serious Decisions, and Forrester, my colleagues there did too. Um, and so you could see in that research that buying journeys were long. Buying journeys had buying groups, buying teams attached to them, and all of that stuff. But I think that research for me was missing a few key pieces, and the narrative was not all in place. And so um, once I got here and had the ability to do it myself, I was really anxious to say, okay, well, what is that whole narrative of how that works? And let's get into the details of it. That's kind of how and why that came up, because it's been a long time coming. And the short summation of all of that is it always seemed like it didn't work the way we thought it worked,
Yeah.
and it doesn't.
Okay. So what'd you find? What is happening
Yeah.
in the B2B buyer journey?
Yeah.
How do companies purchase today? And
Yep.
um versus like we talked about how we think it happens, but what is
Yeah.
happening? What'd you find?
So, so it starts with, you've got an addressable market, an ideal customer profile set of accounts. So it starts with the idea that, look, 90 to 95% of those are not in market now for the thing that you sell. And so that has to be the baseline of where everybody starts. And then you have to agree on what set of accounts that you're interested in. So with that as kind of the baseline, the average B2B buying journey from the time a member of a buying group says, okay, let's start researching a solution, to the time that they actually sign the deal, is 11 months. And there are two primary drivers of how long a buying journey is. They're all going to be a couple of months for the most part in B2B. If it's a purchase of 10,000 or more, it's probably going to take a couple of months for that thing to go from research to purchase, but average across B2B is 11 months. Two things that change that are, not surprisingly, the cost of the thing.
Mm.
So more expensive things take longer to buy. But the most important factor is how many vendors the buyers evaluate. And this is a thing that I don't think too many people think about as a factor. I had never thought of it as I would not have said, oh, here's the most important factor is going to be how many vendors they evaluate. But it's far and away the most important driver of the complexity of buying. So if I evaluate 3 vendors in my process, the buying process involves 9 people in the buying group, and it's about a 9-month buying process. If I involve 4, it's 11 people and 11 months. 5 is 13 and 13. That's roughly how it goes.
Hmm.
So adding vendor, you add or subtract, add a vendor, you add 2 people and 2 months to the buying process. That's how much harder it is to evaluate a vendor, right? So that was a surprise. Yeah, if you once you add about $100,000 in value, that adds about a half a person in a couple of weeks to the buying process. So it has a big impact, but it's not nearly as big as just how many vendors you're evaluating. Which also tells us that, I think you've got to be, we've got to do a better job of enabling buyers to compare how we really do differentiate ourselves from our competitors, rather than differentiating on how we describe what we do. Differentiate actually on what we do and make that easier for buyers to see, because that seems to be very hard for buyers to see. So we've got an 11-month average buying process overseen by 11 people. Those numbers are just coincidentally the same, although they do move, very much in the same direction. And the average buying group this year in our survey was looking at 4.5 vendors on
Mm.
average. That varies a bit by region, and there are some other things that cause that to vary as well. In APAC, it's about 5.5, and they have commensurately longer buying cycles. 13 people in the buying group, about 13 months of the buying cycle. What happens when you, if you add, excuse me, when you add a vendor you're adding more complexity. Somebody, one person in the buying group might like that vendor. And now you've got to get everybody on the same page with one more competitor in the ring. Um, when you and because you're going to evaluate more vendors, you tend to add more people to the buying group. Everybody knows what happens when you add people to a decision making group. It certainly doesn't speed the thing up. It slows it down. And then everybody in the decision making group has to actually do more work than they were going to do when it was a smaller group. Because now, if you've got a preference that you're trying to get consensus on, you've got more work to do to cause that to happen. And so you have more people, but each person is actually doing more work also. So it really ratchets up the level of effort, primarily because of the number of vendors. And then manufacturing is a great example. Manufacturing buyers only evaluate 3-ish vendors on average. Now, almost half of the purchases by a manufacturing company are other manufactured things. So they buy a lot more hardware, machinery kinds of things. And those are three vendors, 7 or 8 people buying process, 7 or 8 month buying process. So everything's short and tidy. And then people in manufacturing companies tend to buy everything else more or less the same way they buy hardware and stuff. So it just, they keep everything much smaller and tidier and small, and so their processes are faster and they're completely predictable. So anyway, that's the buying process, and that's what's happening with a buying group that's trying to evaluate teams. The other thing that's really interesting is that everybody in the buying group does a lot of their own research. So we asked about the number of interactions, including digital content and human interactions, and buyers say, I think the average is 19 interactions per vendor. And when you look at the champion role in the buying process, they have more than the person who might be the financial ratifier, but only by a couple. And so that was a surprising thing that we found, is that even the people who we think of as really just maybe coming in at the end and saying yes or no, now they're on your website looking at all your stuff all throughout. And so you better address what they're concerned about. All right. So that's all of that. That's kind of the mechanics of it. The really, the stuff that I think really, really impacts the way that we think about convincing buyers and driving preference is that buyers say, first of all, they don't engage with sellers until they're 69-70% of the way through the buying process. So just say roughly 2/3. And that is the most consistent finding I think I've ever seen. It doesn't matter who you ask. It doesn't matter what industry. It doesn't matter how much the thing costs. It doesn't matter how many vendors they're evaluating. They're going to tell you that they interacted with sellers about 2/3 of the way through the journey. Now, we asked, did you, so that's not really a new number. And I knew that we would find something like that because that's what we've seen from other research over time. So what I was really interested in is why is that number going to be that number? And so we asked, did you initiate first contact with the vendors, or, did you just respond to an email or phone call? And more than 80% of the time, buyers are saying that they initiated the first interaction with buyers and with sellers. And that's also surprising because we think of, buyers having lots of phone calls and emails from vendors, and that's what we experience, right?
Right.
I think if you look at your own experience, you would also find that you ignored all of them, right? Until you were ready to engage. And so what buyers are very clearly saying is, I'm not going to engage until I'm ready. And the nail in the coffin of that one is we looked at, so that there's about 20% who say that, no, my first interaction was because I got a phone call and I picked up, or I got an email and I responded. And that happens at the exact same time or later. So the fact that you're calling and emailing them does not change the time at which they interact with you. And I like to pause on that for a moment because, we talk about this whole inbound marketing, and the premise of inbound marketing is I get people to come to my website, they reveal who they are, and then I send my armies of people out to try to get them to engage. I can do that. And then because I do that, I produce opportunities, pipeline, and revenue. And what the data say from buyers is No, you can't. So you can get me to come to your website and you can get me to give you my name if you make me, but that doesn't mean you're going to get me to talk to you until I'm ready. And so literally I'm saying you cannot materially change when a buyer is going to interact with you just because you're calling and emailing. It doesn't change it. And that's like it tears down the whole inbound marketing.
Yeah.
You know,
So
I
what
call it the MQL industrial complex.
yes. What happens when sales or pre-sales or BDR or SDRs, whatever you want to call them, what happens when they over pursue these, the buying teams and all of that in this process and do it too soon? Like a lot of, because if I'm researching, I may end up, in your cycle or hit your thresholds like we talked about for an MQL. Now I'm sitting in their queue. What happens when
Yeah.
I overly pursue those leads? Just do I discard that vendor or like what's happening in that process?
Um, I think a number of things. So one, if you're just pursuing, so the first most important thing that happens is nothing. Uh, just absolutely nothing. And I think for the most part, those overtures are just ignored. Um, if they're obnoxious, I'm sure it's bad for your brand, and it probably reduces the likelihood that you're the preferred vendor.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think you can probably improve your position with the buyer if you do it well. Like if your pursuit is really about enabling buyers and providing some sort of value for them, then I think it's at least at worst neutral, and at best maybe you're continuing to increase the value of the brand in doing that. So if you're not leading with, can I get a demo? Can I get a demo? Can I get a meeting? If that's all that it's about, you're probably just ignoring folks. And at best, you're going to be ignored. At worst, you're harming your reputation. But if what you're doing is ensuring that, if they've looked at a bunch of stuff on your website, but they haven't seen this other cool thing, if you're delivering it to them instead of, just asking for a meeting, if you're making sure, like Six Sense is a great example. I think we do a great job of it. If we see an account that's demonstrating a lot of interest on our website, we make sure that their CMO is invited to participate in the CMO community that we sponsor, right? Their BDR leader is invited to participate in that community. So, we're reaching out and actually, inviting people to do things that aren't getting a pitch, that don't involve 6 cents selling to you.
Yep.
Um, it's developing a relationship. That's difficult for everybody to do because it requires a little faith that building the brand and the relationship is going to turn into an outcome you want downstream. And what we really want is we want something that we think is an immediate outcome that we can control and produce. And if we just work harder, we can produce more of that outcome. But what the data very, very clearly say is no, you can't. And
Mm.
so I'm going to use this analogy, and I'm a little sensitive that this people take this the wrong way, but I'm going to use it anyway. So we know that they can train pigeons to poke a button in their cage and get a little pellet to drop into the bin. But the other thing that happens is they experiment with dropping the pellets at random time. And so pellet, the pigeon's in the cage, pellet drops. The pigeon just doesn't sit there and think, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. I'll have the pellet and then we'll see what happens next. What they actually do is in however pigeons think, they think, well, what was I doing that might have caused that pigeon, that drop, that pellet to drop? And if they were spinning around and pecking the ground right before the pellet drop, then next time they want a pellet, they spin around and poke the ground. And, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. But if they do it a few times, eventually the timing of the pellet dropping the next random time and that behavior are close enough where it thinks, I did it. But maybe what I have to do is peck the ground twice. And so now they update their behavior, they improve, they keep doing it, they keep working at it. And now they're in this cycle of literally continually getting better at causing this random thing that's going to happen anyway. And so they literally call them superstitious pigeons because they have this superstition about what's causing.
Yeah.
I think we've had a superstition about what's causing buyers to show up in our pipelines. We think that we've been causing them to become opportunities in pipeline because we called them, when what was really causing them to become opportunities in pipeline is because we marketed to them, because we had a reputation in the marketplace, we made ourselves available to them. But it's all of the stuff that preceded this moment where we first engaged. It's all of that other stuff that actually caused it. And maybe I'll get in trouble for saying this now, but just on a call yesterday, 6 Sense call, we're talking about, our quarter pipeline. How's it looking? Great. Or this is going to be a great quarter. Things are doing this. And everybody wants to talk about what are we doing now that's causing all this pipeline? When everybody actually already knows that what you're doing now is causing next quarter's pipeline or the quarter after that, right? What we did 6 months ago is causing this pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard. That's just like more difficult to do. What's much more of what everybody wants to do right away is say, well, what do we do? What do we, this campaign's working. Like,
Well, when you
we're
have your
reaching.
marketing budget and you have to show ROI, right? And then we'll talk about this a little bit later, I think, is like, how do we adjust our metrics? And then how do we message that up to executive leadership who has a certain mindset, even at the CFO level and et cetera. But
Yeah,
when you have to show ROI for your budget in a given calendar year, right? Jan 1 to December 31 or whatever your fiscal is, right? That puts you in that sort of a box. To your point, like
yeah,
I was reviewing a client's 2025 strategy the other day, and they have a very sort of duality to their year. So the first half of the year is very much about generating pipeline, and the second half of the
me,
year is very much about closing pipeline, right? Their selling season is like Q3, late Q3. And just given their audience. And one of the things I said to them is like, one of your plans needs to be second half of the year. It's not just about focusing on closing, but what are you doing to seed pipeline for
right.
2026?
Yeah,
And so, but that's hard to think about because I'm going to go spend money there. I'm going to spend resources. I have to think about it. And I won't see any value from that until the following fall, potentially, right? Or
that's right.
Q3 of the
Yeah,
following year. And that's a really hard place for marketers to be when their organization is looking at, you know, quarter over quarter, year over year, and spend and ROI.
I think that's at the heart of one of the biggest problems that we have in B2B for B2B marketing, especially that marketing operates on a different time scale from sales. It just does. Uh, because buying operates on that different time scale. So, like recapping what I've said so far, we know that a buyer, the whole thing takes 11 months on average. They're not going to talk to you until month 8, right?
Mm.
So they've been in market for a long time. They've had hundreds and hundreds of content interactions with you. By the way, they may have talked to somebody who's not a seller in your organization. They probably have, like more than half of them will have talked to somebody who's not a seller. Um, they'll have talked to analysts and consultants. 70% will bring in a third party to help them. But they're not talking to your seller. And so you, as a company, you don't actually know about that opportunity yet, in a real way. You don't, if you're tracking intent data and all of that, then you could know that there's something out there, but you're probably thinking, well, whatever we're doing is not working because they're not responding and they're not talking to us. But they're in the process of thinking all of this through. And so I think, back on what's that buying process like, I think we need to think like empathetically, think about, most people who I'm talking to are, have the experience of being a B2B buyer themselves. And we need to bring more of that experience to our understanding of your buyers, because if you think about your experience, like if you're the head, let's say that you're a head of demand and you're thinking about, do I want to buy an ABM platform? Okay, yes, we agree that we think we need one. We go out into market. Now, if you come to this point where you agree you think you need one, and let's say you haven't bought one before, you come to that moment having already done a bunch of research, having been in conversations about this. The only reason you would think we need one is because you know about that already, right? That's like, it's not out of nowhere. So you've already done a bunch of research in this space, whether it's conversational research or desk research, whatever it is. You've been around, you've heard a lot, you've been to events, you know, right? But now you're saying, okay, you know what? We're going to put it in the budget. We're going to go start looking right now. So given that, chances are you're going to end up on a vendor website, not 2 months from now or 3 months from now, but 2 days from now. Buyers, 75% of buyers say that they know, or let's put it the other way. Buyers have 75% of their short list they know on day one, 3 out of 4 of it. So they know who the vendors are. Day one, they go out in the market, they start looking around. Problem is, I may be the person who's in charge of, say, demand, or I may be the person in charge of ABM, but I've got a CMO, I've got a head of marketing ops, I've got finance person, I've got somebody else. All of these people are going to have opinions, and they may be different opinions. And so over the course of researching the solutions and deciding what we're going to buy, I may be the most influential one, but I still have to get other people to agree that the one that I want is the one that we're going to get. And that's a very hard process, or it can be a very hard process in organizations. And so that takes time. And when you get to consensus as a group about that, you know, and one of the clear things is you don't want to be pitched while that's happening. And I think that's one thing that we have to just take on board. I mean, again, if you think about your own experience, you know that that's true. You want outside help in understanding what to get, but what you don't want is a pitch.
Yeah.
You want to be able to take in information, explore it, take it apart, examine it, but you don't want to get pitched. So finally, you go through this long process, looking at all of this information, coming to consensus as a team about what you're going to get. That's the trigger for then engaging with sellers and allowing pitches, so that it's kind of like you've got to get your act together so that you're not going to be overly influenced by whatever pitch comes along first or next. And I think that's the image of the buying journey that we have to have in mind. That first 70% of the buying journey is about that buying group coming to consensus. They're coming to consensus based on what they can know about you from everybody else, and from their interactions, their past experience, past buying processes, all of that, but not from calling you and doing demos. That's not part of the selection process. That's part of the validation process. So once I start, and that's the thing that we see is that, at that 70% point, buyers have already decided on a preferred vendor about 80% of the time. Or put another way, they don't change their mind after that 70% mark. And so, you either win by 70% or you're in trouble, because I think the other 20%, most of that's probably where your sellers you have good AEs in those accounts and they develop relationships with folks. And so that 20% is not subject to the rules that everybody else has to play by. Like if your A's have great relationships with folks in the accounts, good. You don't have to play by the rules that everybody else has to play by. You get to be part of their buying process. But I think it's probably very rare that you get to be part of the selection process if you don't have those relationships in place, or if you can't get them into place very early. And we could talk about how you can do that, because I think it is possible, but it's just not how it mostly happens.
Well, that's all really fascinating research. And I think to your point, like reframing the way we think about the B2B buyer journey and being empathetic to that about how we purchase will be really effective for marketers and sellers alike as they try to really capture and it really generate the pipeline they need to and the revenue that they need to. Thanks for tuning in to the RevRoom today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. For more, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Don't forget to follow Inverta on LinkedIn for more updates and exclusive content. That's Inverta, INVERTA. Have a question or a topic you'd like us to cover? Reach out and let us know. Until next time, keep innovating and driving that revenue growth. See you next time.